All right. We got Danny Campos. Danny,
We're here.
what's up, Danny? How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm just jamming out to that amazing music.
Good. It's good music.
Yeah, I told you I'd be fist pumping, and I was.
You were.
All right, everybody. Well, good morning. Welcome. I say welcome back a lot because, we've been doing this call since I want to say April of 20 or May of 2021. Elise will text me if I'm wrong, but we're over 2 years now. We're closing on 2.5 years since we started doing this call. So it's not welcome back for everybody because many of you guys are new and maybe you haven't seen these calls before, but it's been a pleasure to be able to host these. And it's my favorite call. I do a lot of calls, but this is my favorite one because I get to speak to people outside of my organization. And today you guys are going to get to hear from not only just somebody that's, in a different org, but these are all owners that are killing it. Some of the best examples in our business, Danny, who's going to talk to you guys today. I've seen him go from a new guy to a leader, to an assistant manager, to a new promotion, to now Danny, is it 5 promotions and 2 assistant managers you have?
Yep.
And how long have you been in ownership?
Now this month is good. Oh, wow. Yesterday was 18 months.
Okay. So 1.5 years, already he's got 5 promotions, working in all different types of programs, 5G, AT&T, Ready Refresh Retail, helping retrain offices, just a phenomenal example of the business. And he's an incredible student. But one of the reasons why Danny got selected to talk to you guys today is because he's really good at conversations. And I look at conversations as really the key to leadership. If you get good at conversations, you will influence people and help them grow. If conversations don't go well, it's going to be frustrating. So my strong recommendation today is to have your notebooks out. If you're on your phone, take screenshots because what Danny's going to share with you guys today is absolute gold. And we're going to really try to leave time at the end for questions. 2 weeks from this call, Danny's promoting owner Richard Anderson is going to be on this call talking about opportunities. So you guys have some amazing speakers coming up and you already have had some. Other announcements. We got Dallas. The regional meeting is this weekend. Our SoCal meeting is September 10th. Our Philadelphia meeting is September 17th. Orlando, October 1st, and Northern California, October 8th. So again, great networking opportunities. Really, really excited about where the business is at today, and it's only getting better. So Danny, you're the king of conversations. And I know this, wasn't natural right away, but you become extremely good at it. So excited to take notes today, and the floor is yours.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And am I sharing the slides or?
Not quite, not yet.
Cool.
And everybody, text your leaders. Text, even if you got new people that are already pushing for leadership, text them, put in the group chat, because one little nugget you can hear on today's call may help you retain or help you develop someone this week. So please spread the word.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks, Van, for letting me talk to all the team. Definitely appreciate it. And when he says the king of conversations, I think me and Van we're laughing now because at one point in time I was terrible at them. So I think that's the only reason why I have the fruit on the tree to even talk about it, because it's definitely been a consistent skill that's been exercised and stretched over the course of, I think, the last 1.5 years, since I've been in the training program. So guys, I think conversations are definitely the pinnacle to growing a large team. Like you just can't have an office that's producing, that is flowing, that is growing at a consistent, stable manner without having good conversations, right? I think good conversations are the prerequisite to running a good office. And the faster you kind of fight that head on, might be the reason you run a great office or make it through the program for sure. So I think we can jump right into these slides for sure, right?
I don't know if you're sharing them yet. Did you press share?
Oh, okay, cool. No, that's probably step one.
I was like, I think you haven't shared it yet. All right, there we go.
There you go. Can you see it?
Yes, we can. And any questions you guys have, please put them into the chat as we go. We'll get to them at the end. If you want to save them to the end, we want to make sure there's a lot of Q&A at the end of this call because this topic is huge. We know how big conversations are. I sucked at them way worse than you guys could ever imagine. So when you have questions, please ask him. And Danny's got a lot of good info. So
yeah, for sure. So one of the slides I wanted to start with was definitely the preface about conversations, because I think when we hear conversations, you're like, oh, there has to be some perfect system. I think the number one thing we got to realize is, as owners, as running an office, being in this industry, conversations are situational, right? And there's like, I put 6 tips that I think kind of helped me not have terrible conversations, because it's not so much about today about how to have a good conversation. It's just things to stay away from to make it a bad conversation. And the number one thing,
loading for you, Danny?
say it again.
Loading still for you, or is it on your screen?
No, it's on my end.
Oh, it says loading for us. Maybe I messed up. Try resharing.
Cool. Let me try that.
It just says loading.
Let me try this instead.
No problem. Oh, somebody said we can see the slide, so it's all my fault. Okay, now we can see it.
Now you see it? Okay, cool.
Thank you, Jared Hill. You're the man.
Jared Hill, he's my hero. Okay, yeah. So number one thing is gonna be for me is like, you will not be good at the beginning. I think a lot of us are afraid to have any conversation, whether it's an easy conversation or a tough one, mainly because you're like, well, I'm just not good at it. No one is. Like, no one just comes out into the program like, I am perfect at this, at having conversations. It is gonna be one. I remember having my first conversation when I was with Richard, and he's like, hey, you have to have this crucial conversation. And like, I didn't sleep the night before. I was like sweating. I was planning it out. I'm like, he's going to say this and I'm going to have this, and it's going to go back and forth. And then I go into it, and 20 seconds in, I'm off script. So it's like, you're never going to be good at the beginning. The point is to consistently revisit and dissect and see where you can improve on. And after, I think, about 6 to 8, 10 conversations, you're going to start seeing a consistent growth in. The second thing is this defining what kind of conversation you need to have. So I think one of the biggest things for me was, with conversations, you have to realize, is it just the one-time action that I'm talking about? Is it a pattern that I have to go ahead and extract and bring to light? Or is it a relationship offense? Because if someone, you have to have consistently the same conversation, they're breaching trust in that conversation. So definitely understanding, is it an action, a pattern, or a relationship offense? Third one is, I think I was really afraid to have conversations because I didn't want to offend anyone. I'm like, well, I don't want to piss anyone off, or I don't want to get anyone, I don't want to rub anyone the wrong way. And you have to realize, like, hey, do you want short-term discomfort versus long-term dysfunction? And you have to decide which one is it, because not having the conversation might let a bad seed reap in a long-term office, right? But if you having the conversation now, there's some feelings that might be offended short-term, but we care more about people's future rather than their feelings when having conversations. Fourth one is, oh, I think I skipped it. My bad. Fourth one is, conversations are a skill you build, not a talent. We kind of covered that one already. So just make sure you consistently build that. And realize where you want the conversation to end. People, I think the number one thing I was having terrible conversations with is I didn't know where I wanted it to end. So I would talk in circles and in circles and in circles. And I'm sure any other owner can agree with me, but I was an hour in and I'm like, I feel like we got nowhere. And I would sit there like, I think this conversation made the situation almost worse. So realizing where you want it to end, because that allows you to stay on the path to having a good, crucial conversation. And also 90% of the conversations are going to be about the messy stuff. It's going to be about things that you naturally cannot dissect. It's not always going to be a crystal clear conversation of, oh, you were late. Don't be late. Let's fix it. Cool. And then they never do it again. It's going to be about attitudes. It's going to be about self-image. It's going to be about teamwork, how people view them, long-term, what they are. It's going to be about that sticky, messy stuff. So the more you practice it, the more crucial, the more productive they're going to get towards the end. And I added a quote down there that really stuck with me, that I was reading a book, and it said, like, the gap from where you are to where you want to be is the amount of hard conversations you're willing to have. And it really, really makes sense, because crucial conversations is just another form of holding standards. And if you can't hold standards, then you're also not willing to have those tough conversations.
Yeah, you talked about being afraid to have conversations. I think that's one of the problems that a lot of people have. I was very afraid. When you were new though, because one of the things where my whole training program turned around was when instead of me just trying to handle it myself, I think we network and then we go and try to handle it. I brought the conversation to my owner and I watched them have it. So how much did that help you watching Richard have the conversation before you actually did it yourself?
I think a lot of it was understanding that even if the message is clear, sometimes I'm the wrong messenger. So I think running it through upline counsel, running it through coaching allows you to kind of funnel where the knowledge goes, and understanding, hey, maybe even if I'm the one that found this problem out, I might not be the perfect person to bring it to light. Sometimes your upline does need to have the conversation, and other times you just got to be ready, depending on the situation, for you to have the conversation. But I always like to walk through each conversation with Richard, with my upline, saying like, hey, this is how I think I should handle the conversation. Is this the right way I should view it? And sometimes I was ready to say, for them to be like, perfect, good to go have it. And other times it's like, hey, that's a terrible take on it. Let's revisit that. So it's like understanding if you're, where you need to fix, or whether you're ready to have it or not, is definitely an important part.
Yeah. So like, there's a saying like, shoot first, ask questions later. I think sometimes we get in the habit, because we look at ourselves like we're leaders, we should know by now. Just don't do it if you're not familiar with what to do. If somebody comes in late and you're like, I want to talk to this person, but they're late, go to your owner and say, hey, I haven't had this conversation before. How do I have it? Or, hey, go to your owner and say, hey, can you have this conversation with this person so I can watch? Once I watch one time, I got this. But I just don't expect to handle a conversation if you've never handled it before. Bring your conversations to people who have expertise in it. The leaders that have big teams, the assistant manager, the owner, like leaders that kind of go rogue. I mean, and we've all done it. And it cost me 3 or 4 months of my training program. And Danny, you could probably say the same, of like things where you guessed, you're like, I'm just going to try it because I just want to figure it out. And then all you need to do is ask, hey, how would you have this conversation? And by being a sponge before, you don't get into the shoot first, ask questions later, because that's where you get into trouble. So my advice, based on what Danny's saying, these are all really good things, but just network before you have these conversations. So that way you have some preparation going into them. And once you get good at them, it'll just be a thing you can do. But the worst thing you can do is to A, not network, and then B, ignore the conversation altogether and just be like, I'll have it tomorrow. Because if you procrastinate one day, you'll procrastinate 2 days. Next thing you know, you won't even have the conversation about the person being late, because you're like, oh shit, I just kind of forgot. So really, really good advice though. I love those 6 points I just wrote down. Those are great.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Making sure you have fruit on the tree to talk about the topic, for sure. And so I kind of break down conversations into 2 parts, right? Part 1, part 2. Part 1, I call it the six E's. This just gives me a good system to follow. That way I don't go away from it, because you're either the person who's afraid to have the conversation, like Van said, and you never have it. And then 6 months down the road, you're like, hey, remember that one day you were late and now it's just ineffective? Or you're like me and you want to be gung ho and you're like, hey, you suck, XYZ, do this. And then the conversation is taken more defensively rather than productively. So this allowed me to produce a system to where, 1, I'm not being gung ho, but 2, I'm also not afraid to have it, because I'm keeping it really effective. And this really has helped my office, I think, definitely produce good conversations. So the number 1 thing is establish tone. For me, I get passionate, which is another word for emotional, which is another word for can't control it. So establishing tone allows you to is really just establishing credibility, like the ability to have good conversations. It builds credibility to who you are as a leader. And sitting across from someone who created an offense on your office and still being calm, poised, and collected, it really talks to you as who you are as a leader. So establishing tone really isn't so much for that person. It's really more for your leadership as well. Keeping calm, cool, and collected allows for the conversation not to veer off. The second one is eliminate assumptions. I don't like to I don't like to work in gray area when I'm having conversations. So I'm like, hey, if we fix this, this is what's going to happen. If we don't, this is what's going to happen. Right. And I try to eliminate as many assumptions. I'm like, hey, we're not talking about XYZ. We're talking specifically about this. And when on the part where I'm talking about eliminating assumptions, I always like to go ahead. And that's where I bring up if it's an action, a pattern, or a relationship problem. Right. I'm sure y'all have always heard of the level 1, level 2, or the level 3 conversations. If someone's late one time out of the year, I'm not going to go in guns blazing when in reality it was a one-time offense. I'm going to have some grace there. So eliminating assumptions isn't like, hey, I'm not condemning you. I'm more trying to figure out, open the pool of meaning to why this is happening so that we can get over it together. So eliminating assumptions is really important because it doesn't allow you to go ahead and jump the gun and be like, why were you late? And the person's like, well, I got in a car crash. And now you're like, oh, smokes, never mind. And now you're looking like really silly in the end. The third E is explain the goal, right? I think we miss this in conversations a lot. I know I did a lot where I wouldn't explain why we're having the conversation. Hey, I'm having this conversation because I want you to be in the next level and this is stopping you. Because I think people take a lot of conversations defensively when they don't know that we're having it because we actually care, right? I know we've always heard like the saying like, oh, we're having this conversation because we care. We're holding you to a higher standard. Higher standard is a higher calling. When I was in the training program, I'm like, no, you just want to get mad at me. Like, but explaining the goal, Richard was always so good at saying like, hey, if you fix this, I think this is what's hindering your performance. I think you're not performing because of XYZ, not prepping out the day, not showing up on time. So explaining the goal allows you to be like, hey, they're open to feedback a lot more because they understand what's going to help them following through if they fix it. The fourth E is explain the problem origin. Finding the root is the biggest, hardest thing to do when having crucial conversations. I like to find this out prior. So I like every night before the office, I like to prep my conversations. And finding the root really saves your attitude as a leader because no one likes to have that stale conversation every single week about that person being late. But it's more so we're probably attacking the branch rather than the actual root of the problem. So explaining the problem origin is like, hey, because you're so unorganized, it's causing you to be late. But if you just attack being late, they can't ever fix why it's that. Or, hey, because you think you're better than everyone, we lack a lot of teamwork, right? Explaining the problem origin is so important because it allows someone to attack the actual root of the problem. That way the side effects aren't bursting at the seam. The fifth E is emphasize the impact. I like to talk about what harm or what good it's causing because crucial conversations can also be positive sometimes, but emphasizing the impact talks about like, hey, this is what it's causing in your growth or in the office or long-term or not, because some people don't understand. Like I had to have a money habit or a money habit problem conversation just 2 days ago. And I'm like, hey, if you can't manage $1,000 a week, what do you think our habits are going to look like when you're an owner making $100,000? And it's like emphasizing the impact lets them think a little bit more long-term because no one sees the long-term right away in that one instance, right? As owners, we're able to go ahead and look 6 months, 12 months down the road and saying like, hey, if this continues, this is the impact it's going to have on your growth and your cycle of development. The last one is estimating the severity. I'm like, hey, this is a really quick fix. I think if we just planned our day out a little bit more, you got your clothes ready the night before, we wouldn't be so late. Can you agree? I'm like, hey, traffic wasn't invented yesterday. So if you plan to show up at 8:30 for leaders meeting and one red light, you're going to show up at 8:32. Agreed? So on the scale of like 0 to 10, this is like a 2. I think it's just one simple fix. Yeah. Are you willing to fix it? And then you're estimating the severity. That way they don't take it too much to heart.
Wow. So I love the fact that, you're explaining the goal. I think, having a goal and the fact that you wrote the goals down the night before of the conversation is good. When you're coaching people and you said it best, Danny, like you got to really understand like what the actual root is of why they're doing it. But that kind of goes back to the whole thing of coaching people through their goals, not coaching them with your goals in mind. And when you're coaching, when you're going into a conversation, if you're pissed off at this person because you want them to be a leader and you're like, damn it, this is my third leader or my second leader. I just need this person to come in on time, set the pace, and I'll get promoted. Well, this person's going to like kind of feel that from you, that you're like, hey, show up on time. Where what Danny's saying is you go into it and you're trying to figure out what's the root of this. The other thing I know that I think is really important in offices, when offices are really focused on the opportunity, where everyone's talking about management, opening up offices, expansion, and that's the conversation. If you're trying to fix someone's habits, it all goes back to the opportunity of like their step 7, why they're here. But you're in an office where you're not talking about a bigger goal or anything bigger goals that they have in mind. The little things you're trying to ask them to do, they're going to seem like you're trying to micromanage them for just like a crappy job. Hey man, take notes. Hey, show up on time. Hey, you got to do 3 apps. Hey, send in your goals. If I'm you, just like Danny's talking about, if these people aren't doing this, you just, press time, to call time out. You have a conversation with the person. Hey, do you really want to do this? Why are you here? What's important to you? What motivates you? Why do you want to work hard? Because it's okay if you don't want to do this. It's okay. And I think, Danny, you can even correct me, but like a lot of leaders, they get into like manager mode where they're like the way that they think of managing people is by just slapping them on the hand all the time and they do things incorrectly. They're not understanding that like if a person's motivated to grow into management because the office is talking about it, it's promoted all the time, you're talking about goals, like you're setting up goals with your people. Now all these conversations you're having, the micromanaging you're doing makes sense because there's a bigger vision in mind. But Danny, I mean, you tell me, like when your office is really promoting opportunity and promotions are happening and you're running opportunity meetings every week, how much easier is it to have these conversations with people versus when maybe you as the owner or leader sometimes get too focused on just sales or too focused on the day-to-day stuff?
Yeah, I think that when you have a really soft culture, it requires a lot more harder coaching and micromanaging. But when you have a culture that understands the opportunity, holding people accountable isn't an opportunity, it's more of the standard. And when people fall out of line, the captains of the team are always the one calling them in, right? Reeling them in. And it's only because they understand it. Like going back to explaining the goal, I know what a lot of the top leaders who I know are going to be owners in the next couple of months, they're so good at relating it back to the office goal. Like, hey, this is stopping us from getting to 30 leaders, right? Like we have a leg day coming up on Friday. And I heard this conversation in passing and it's like, hey, you showing up late as a leader is making other people think that showing up late is creating leadership. And that's stopping us from getting to 30 leaders. And my goal is to get the office to 30 leaders. And so it's like relating everything back to the office goal sometimes, I think really creates that opportunity and that conversation to where people aren't offended to being held to a certain standard.
Yeah. And the ultimate icing on the cake is telling them what you believe they're capable of. If you always in every conversation say to them, hey, I think you're capable of much more. Danny, I think you're capable of doing 300 apps a week. Danny, I think you're capable of having 30 owners. And of course, you don't over exaggerate for no reason, but like you've got to always sprinkle in here's what I feel like you're capable of. Here's what I believe you can do. Here's what your potential is. All I want to do is see you hit that. Man, do that enough times, eventually someone will be like, all right, I'm going to do it. But if you only coach people and you're critical, but then you don't give them that positive spin of like, I think you're missing out, like Danny said at the beginning, on what you're capable of. If we fix this thing, holy crap, what you could do. And that gets people excited. So really good stuff. I love it.
Yeah. And I love that you met the build a better image, because I got really good at doing these 60s, but forgot part 2. And forgetting part 2 is just as bad as not having the conversation at all, because having part 2 about doing only part 1. And I think this is really important to kind of pick out. Doing only part 1, like Van is saying, puts you into that manager mode of like slapping people on the wrist, having executivitis, right? Calling everyone out, attacking, and never really building. Part 2 is now where it becomes more of an actual conversation. Because if you just do part 1, it's more of a presentation. Like, hey, I'm presenting what you did wrong, right? But doing part 2 together, coupled with part A, creates more of a conversation. And conversations, right, create buy-in to your goal, but presentations alone create blockages and defensiveness and entitlement and all that. So part 2 is where we call the 4 A's. Okay. And the hardest one to kind of pick apart, but the most important and the most intricate is probably the ask. right? And when we say ask, it's like now this is becoming more of a conversation. I've already stated our goal. I've stated what the offense is. I've stated the severity of it. I've stated all this. Now I want to make it more of a conversation and open up where this person's idea is really stemming from. So I like to ask them a lot of questions because questions create clarity, right? And without clarity, right, fogginess, gray area, all of that is resistance. So I like to create questions for clarity. And I like to ask them like, hey, what are your thoughts on this? And fill in the blank. What are your thoughts on showing up late? How do you think that affects your long-term growth? Right? Or, hey, I would be doing a disservice to your goals if I didn't hold you to the standard. Right? Asking them the simple questions of like, do you think this help or hurts your cycle of development? And letting them answer back, because I think when we know the problem, you're like, I've already had this conversation so many times. I had this problem when I was a top leader. I've had the late conversation so many times that I would try to make a 10-minute conversation into a 30-second one. And it's their first time hearing it. So with skipping the ask, it doesn't open up that room for partnership, because if you have a good conversation the right way, I know the best conversations are the ones I was never ready to hear. Right? The best conversations that I had with Richard were the ones that I didn't feel so good in the moment, but I felt really good afterwards because he still treated me like a partner. Right? So being able to create that relationship is so important. And it usually happens on the first A, which is ask. So just some things I have is like ask questions for questions, create clarity. What are your thoughts on this? And where does this stem from? That helps you find the goal or the root of the problem. The second one is advise. Guys, a lot of times we like to be the coach when they really just want an ear. Okay. Or reverse, right? We give an ear and we're buddy with people way too much when in reality they need a coach. And advise, right, is I like to ask the simple question of like, hey, are you open for counsel on this? Like, do you want to solve this together? And if they say yes, now they've officially opened up the floor to give your personal opinion on how to fix it. Because I think we give too many opinions without them really saying out loud, hey, I want to fix this together. And that's what creates blockages and resistance and defensiveness and a bad conversation. So on the second A, which is advise, it's really important that you just ask a simple question of like, hey, are you open to counsel on solving this together? Right? Or let's unpack this together. Or like, I like to go through this scenario that I learned from Chang, right? She goes down two futures. Here's the future if we continue down this bad habit path. Here's the future if we continue down the fix it path. Which path sounds better for you? And where do you need me to be on that path with you? Right. So that's super important as well. The third one is going to be agree, right? Agree upon their future cadence. I think a conversation without a future standard is wasted potential, because you just gave 10, 15 minutes of holding up the office's standards. But if you don't talk about like, hey, what should your actions look like after this? Then they're going to go right back. Right. I think sometimes we have rubber band conversations where we pull it back and then we let go and it goes right back to the form, right back to normal. And it's because we're not agreeing on a future thing. Like, hey, if you continue being late, what would you do if you're in my position? Or if you continue having a lack of social awareness, what would you do if you're in my position? I think we sometimes fall short of agreeing on that future plan of action and letting them set the accountability. Right. When I have crucial conversations, especially when it's about sales, I like for them to set the goal. Because I'm gonna be like, hey, remember when you set the goal on Monday? Now it's Thursday and we're a little bit short of it. So, and now they can't ever hold any, well, I didn't agree with it to begin with, or hey, I didn't, because now it came out of their mouth to begin with in that conversation. And the last one is assure, right? Van mentioned it as well. I like to end on a good note. I like to build the relationship again, whether that's build, break, build, or whether that's whatever it is. I like to just end them with a positive self-image. So if they're receptive, I want to build the relationship again. I like to say, hey, if you fix this, I think we can be great business partners in the future. Or, hey, when we fix this together, your team's going to explode. And ending on that positive note, like Van was saying, like you could be a 300 app owner. You could be a top leader in the office. You could be running an office. You could be managing 10 to 15 people. You could be that next owner, right? You can be that next IG guy. You could be at the conference next, right? Ending that relationship on a good note is so important because it allows people to leave the door on a positive note, right? And one thing I always learned from Richard is just like the consequence dictates the action, positive or negative. right? So if it's like, hey, if you fix this, you get to go here, that dictates their consequence. So really making sure you come up with a great plan of action, and letting them set the accountability is super important for ending the conversation.
Wow, that's really good. That's all good stuff. I love the structure, man. It's like you just follow this stuff and it really can help with like you said, the cadence of a conversation. One other thing I would always, look to do as well with this, is do your best to try to acknowledge try to acknowledge the things that may be causing this bad habit, right? So if I can be self-aware and be like, hey, Danny, like, let's say I'm talking to Danny and he's brand new and he shows up late and he's been late a couple times. Instead of me just going, hey, Danny, what's going on with you being late? I'm going to say to Danny, hey, Danny, listen, I know you're new. I understand it's a totally different field. You came from restaurants, waking up earlier. It's probably been a whirlwind for you in your first couple of weeks. Am I right?
Yep.
Like I'm not saying that to Danny because I'm looking at it as an excuse that he can just continue to be bad. But when I coach someone or go into a conversation, I'm going to try to acknowledge the obvious things. Hey, Danny, listen, I know you got a 2-hour commute. I get it. That's tough. Hey, Danny, listen, I know you got kids and I know the mornings, I'm assuming the mornings must be hectic. Hey, Danny, I know this is a totally different career for you. You came from working in IT. Hey, Danny, I know that your first few days haven't been great. I'm assuming you're a little frustrated. I'm going to say the things that I know are obvious to where that person can listen and hear me acknowledge that I'm aware of them, right? If I go into conversations and I don't say anything that would recognize that I'm aware of what makes them unique, sometimes people turn off their ears because they don't think you really get them, right? So really try to say the things that would lead to the person having a bad habit, not giving them an excuse, but saying, hey, I get it, but you told me you wanted to do this. You told me you wanted to get promoted. And I love the two futures, right? One future is you fix it, one future is you don't. Which one do you want to go down? And then, like you said, Danny, before, I love the agree thing. And just throw yourself under the bus. Mm-hmm. Tell your people that you were terrible at these things. Like, make yourself relatable. Be like, hey man, when I was new, I remember I couldn't show up on time to save my life, but I realized that I wasn't going to get promoted unless I fixed it. A relatable leader is so much better than a leader who's high and mighty that acts like they've always been so great. So Larry talks to you guys and says, hey, I went on a retrain as a rookie owner. He doesn't have to say that. He could hide it. He could say, didn't happen. He'd be ashamed. No, he loves to admit it because it helps people understand that if he can overcome it, then why can't you? And I think don't forget that aspect when you're talking to people, because if you act like you've always known better, totally full of shit. Because a lot of us didn't know. We were worse than the people we're coaching. And then we act like we always knew. So just a couple important things add on top of what Danny said. So good stuff, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. Falling on the sword is definitely a great habit. Oh, I keep doing that. Okay, cool. So one thing, if I could, then I don't know if this is allowed, but I added some recommendations of some audios that I listened to help me build this conversation. Layla Hermosi is just one of my favorite speakers. Her and her husband, Alex Hermosi, just do great talks on Spotify, Apple Music, and all this. I don't even get paid on them. So, I'm giving you good information. But this is a little bit of where I got my audio recommendations on where I learned to have good conversations and productive ones. Another book that I read that helped me on this and stop being so bad at conversations was Crucial Conversations. I think you can kind of run that through a brainstorm what that book's about. And so it just talks about having good, crucial conversations and some skills or some things that really help you have some good ones. It really helped me. And sometimes when I was reading a book, or sometimes when I was ready to have a conversation, I would have to go and reread a chapter or re-listen to an audio just to freshen up. So,
yeah. Wow. Well, please let's get some questions going in the chat for Danny, because we got some time here. I wanted to leave some time so you guys could ask, because we're at a very special time in our business. If you're new to it, you're coming in a golden era where the amount of offices we're going to open up over the next 12, 24, 36 months, whether it's the 5G, whether it's, what we're doing on AT&T, Frontier, adding mobility, the things we got with Arcadia, the list goes on of all these programs, Assurance Wireless, True Connect. I mean, we're just ready to go. But what everybody's focus has to be is how good, how great of a leader can you become? And what separates leaders is how good they are at duplicating themselves. And if you're not good at conversations, where in conversations, like Danny's talking about, you're building people's psychology, you're helping them see the business or see themselves or see, their future in a light that maybe nobody else has before. And your goal is to find those special people and have a ton of conversations with them. I mean, it's not just one, it's over and over and over again. And you gotta take off your beer colored goggles, and you got to stay sober when your people are good at sales, when they're getting promoted to leadership. Your job is to be the sober one in the room and say, I know that guy's good at sales, but man, he's not professional. He drops the F-bomb too much. Hey, I know that person's really good. They just got promoted to leadership. They got 5 people on their team, but they're very sloppy. They don't turn in their goals. They're kind of flying by the seat of their pants. Many of us, including myself, sure Danny too, when we see someone doing good, we want to back off. We don't want to touch it. We're like, oh my God, I don't want to mess this up. And really, what you're doing, you're messing them up by not having conversations with them while they're doing good about things they can get better at. Because if you look at your people and think, oh, I'm only going to talk to the people who are crappy and I'm going to ignore the people who are doing good, you're doing it backwards. Doesn't mean you ignore the people who are doing crappy. But your job, when you look at all the breakdowns Danny just went over, your job is to attack everyone around you, but specifically, especially those people who are doing good, because that's how you're going to get those people to become great. Okay. We got a question from Raven. How do you have a proactive conversation with newer team members to prompt good habits before having to retroactively correct bad habits? Good question.
That is a good question. I think it's a lot of what Van was saying. If you want to be proactive, I think you got to put yourself in their shoes and kind of fall on the sword. Like, hey, whenever I like to have leadership conversations before anybody gets promoted. And I'm like, hey, if you're anything like me, I thought that when I got promoted, I was the hot stuff. I thought I made it. So immediately, what do you think happened to my habits? And they're like, well, they probably lowered. I'm like, exactly. Right. I don't want you to be like me and cost yourself 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe even 5 weeks in this business. And I'm going to tell you exactly what I wish I would have learned right when I got to leadership that helped me kind of keep my growth and actually kind of grow exponentially. So I think falling on the sword and putting yourself in their shoes, and that allows you to be proactive, because in their head, it's like, well, where's this coming from? I haven't even created this offense, right? Like, you're trying to, if you don't fall on the sword, you're trying to arrest someone before they commit a crime. And so it's like, I think falling on the sword allows you to kind of put yourself in their shoes and kind of be proactive, because now when it happens, it's like, hey, I was there, let's fix it together. But you don't want to have a reactive business. You'd rather have a proactive one.
Yeah. And it's just like going over their goals. Like if and the thing is, some of us, we think that we got to hire people that are already finished products. That's not how it works. So many of us came into this business and we were motivated. We had good habits, but there were still a couple things we needed to work on. And so get excited about that work. Don't get excited about babysitting people with bad attitude, but get excited about people that are motivated, that are coming in, where you've got to kind of hold them accountable to the goals they told you. Hey, what are your goals, Danny? Danny says, I want to make $1,000 a week. Great. Well, if you want to make $1,000, you got to do X, Y, and Z. Once you start making $1,000 a week, then what? I want to move up. Okay. How soon do you want to move up? I want to move up soon. Okay. Why do you want to move up? What's important to you? When do you want to be, why management? Why? And Danny's going to say, well, because this, or I want to build a family. I want to do this for my parents. Or I want to travel. Or I want to own a lot of things. I want to have cars, whatever. I say, okay, Danny, you told me all those things. Do you want me to hold you accountable to those things? Danny will say, absolutely. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to make sure I do that. So now we have a platform for me to hold Danny accountable, not because of goals that I set for him, but goals he set for himself through these questions that I came up with. So when you're saying, hey, how do I retroactively fix bad habits? You can't really do it because you don't know what the person is going to do. But all you can really do is get to know them, make them feel important, get them on a Zoom with someone else that's outside of your office that they can relate to, have them see a bigger office, have them see opportunity meetings, and have them go to every regional they can. But then you start to monitor their progress based on their goals they told you, right? And so if you just do that, you're going to be able to identify. And some people, their habits are so bad, you got to get rid of them. But other people, they want it badly and they're willing to fight through it. Okay, Danny, are you following the same structure for convos, even if the individual is repeating the offense, such as coming in late, or are you going to be more tough when having the conversation for the second or third time?
It kind of goes back to my first slide. Maybe I can, if I'm allowed, maybe I can go back to the beginning. Right here, I think it's on the preface. I think you got to dictate whether it's an action, a pattern, or a relationship offense. Step 2 on the preface, because I'm not going to have stale conversations. I'm like, hey, we already talked about this, right? We agreed that on your accountability plan that if you're late, you wouldn't go to the field. So you were late again. I think this is a lack of maturity to your goals and the standards we kind of set in the office. So you're not going to the field today, XYZ, because that's what we agreed on. If it happens again, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's like, if I kind of revisit the accountability plan that we set the time before, and I revisit kind of, I in my head, I'm trying to attack the root, because if someone did the same offense, that means that I didn't have a good conversation. Sometimes people are just, that have bad habits. Sometimes you just gotta let them go, like Van was saying. So I want to be a good leader and kind of fall on the sword and see like, okay, well, did I attack the root? Did I attack the actual problem, or am I attacking a branch? So whenever someone creates a repeated offense, I kind of bring that out to light of like, hey, you see how this is a pattern now? And then we kind of work on it together if they're willing to be coached. If not, we kind of agree to disagree.
Nice. What do you do? What can I do if someone is rolling as a leader?
Rolling as a leader. I think as sales, we dictate people's leadership when they're sales. I know I was terrible at it. I would be like, oh, this is the best leader. They're going to get promoted in 2 months. And usually the best top salesman is usually sometimes, right? Usually the worst owner. So that's not always the case, but let's be honest. I know I was a high rolling guy, didn't have a problem in the field, loved the field. So I was terrible at building teams because not everyone comes in like that. So I think when people start rolling in the fields, I think it is a side effect of them not doing the right things on their habits and their goals. Like Van was saying, when people aren't rolling in the field, they're not motivated to hit their goals, right? So instead of attacking like, hey, like stop walking for free, blah, 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 and getting mad at them in the field, I'm more saying like, hey, why are you so unmotivated to hit your goals? Where can I help to get you and build that motivation? So I think it's a little bit of more of a conversation about their habits and their personal and why they're unmotivated that will cause them to start doing sales.
The key too is like, and that's such good advice. The key too is like, if you're monitoring your team every day, someone really shouldn't like slip by you by rolling 3 days in a row. Like I just think you guys should be attacking it. Like, it's okay. It happens one day, no problem. But if you start to see a trend where a person set a goal for 12 apps in a week and they finish at 7, you're checking in on that person after Wednesday and saying, hey, you're only at 2 apps so far. What's going on? And if I see someone's not performing, my instinct question is like, if I know they've performed before, right? So it's like, if I have evidence that they're consistent, if they've never been that consistent, then I shouldn't be shocked. But if they've been consistent and all of a sudden they're in like a slump, I think slumps are really attitude based. I just think that's it. So I have to figure out what's up with this person's attitude. So let's say Danny's the person that's in a slump. I go, hey, Danny, what's going on with you, man? Are you good? And Danny will be like, yeah. And I'm like, well, I mean, I'm looking at your production. It's like way lower than it normally is. Is everything okay? Like, is everything good at home? Like, are you good? And my questions are not even about the field. They're about everything else that's going on in their life. Because I just want to see where their head's at. Maybe they're negative because they lost a person on their team. And so it's affecting them. Let them talk about it. I want my people to kind of give me their negatives so I can help them. But if you just go to someone and say, what the hell, man, you got to set the pace, and I don't really ask why, you're going to sometimes miss out. People will tell you if you just ask them, what's going on with you? Are you okay? And you're not turning into Dr. Phil. It's just checking in with certain people that normally are not, they're normally performers. So you kind of have to be like shocked and like confused as opposed to frustrated, because frustration will happen later. But I think initially just kind of be perplexed and ask what's going on. And typically you'll find the answer and you got to push that person to solve it. Okay. Well, you got a lot of questions, Andy. All right, let's rapid fire. How do I teach these strategies to employees when I have a difficulty with some of these myself?
I think, well, I'm trying not to sound condescending. I think the answer is in the question itself. You just get better yourself.
Yep. Okay. So if you want to be better at these conversations, you got to be the leader by example. How do you calibrate when to have a crucial conversation? Do you bring it up during the first offense, or do you wait till it's a pattern?
It's kind of like goals, like Van was saying. If you're consistently tracking your team, if you're consistently doing like the Sunday checklist that Van ran like a long time ago, but it's helped my office and shape it to what it is today, you won't let a consistent offense go repeatedly. And if you're talking to someone for the first time on the fifth day they're being late, right? That's why they think it's okay, because they're trying to see, like, I know when there, some reps will try to see how much they can get away with sometimes. So it's like, if you establish a breach early on, they're going to keep breaching. So I think it's like setting your goals correctly, having standards set in place, having I have what leadership traits look like in my office. And I reference it all the time. I'm like, hey, do you think a leader's always late or actually coming in early? They're like, well, early. And I'm like, cool. And that's happening on the first offense.
Yeah, you gotta build. I mean, depends on the person, but if it's somebody that you know can be good, you gotta nip it in the butt. The goal is to not have to repeat yourself. If you have to repeat yourself a lot, that means that the conversation you had wasn't effective enough. Okay. How do you approach having conversations as a younger guy talking to someone who's older than you? AJ from Olivia's office.
I'm a younger guy. So I think I have free to talk about this. I think your age is dictated by your level of maturity in this business. I don't think age really matters. I think people care about if you can get them to the next level. So if they say you consistently building, I wouldn't more worry about the age. I would worry about your fruit on the tree, because I can't talk to someone about being late if I'm the one that's late. I can't talk to someone about high rolling in the field if I'm low rolling in the field. Right? Like if I want to set the pace, if I want to have that crucial conversation, I got to make sure that I have fruit on the tree to talk about it. So I wouldn't look so much more about age and more look about like, hey, am I edifiable in this area?
Nice. Okay. I know there's a question here about what are good examples of good opportunity meetings. That's not a conversation, but I love the question. I would network with Danny offline about opportunity meetings he runs, because I'm sure he'll do a call based on that. Another person says, and it's a good question, but that'd be a whole nother call for opportunity meetings. By the way, Richard isn't talking in 2 weeks, so he's a good person to ask about that too. I'm in my push weeks, and and my top guys don't seem to care. I'm coaching them through their goals, but nothing is clicking. How do I address that?
I think the way you address it is you don't. I think you really keep building. And people always ask me like, well, hey, Danny, do you more worry about quality or do you worry about quantity? We talk about a lot about like, hey, it takes quantity to find quality. So I think you just keep recruiting and you build width. First gens is always the answer, right? Width is aggressiveness, depth is patience. So you really just keep recruiting and keep building, and you're going to find your one captain that wants to talk about the message for you. Because if I walked in to the field one day and I'm like, hey guys, you're not working hard, we need to be working harder, and everyone's in the field and I'm in the office, they're going to be like, man, forget that guy. He sucks. Like he's just trying to be that boss. But if the top leader in the office is like in the field, and then they call everyone and they're like, hey, we're not working hard enough, we should be working harder, right? Like that message is received so much better. So I think if you're in your push weeks, you got to find that one person that wants to go ahead and get you to that next level. And sometimes he needs to be the messenger as well, because the captain's voice is usually louder than the coach's.
Yeah. I love just keep building. Just don't get so sort of dependent on a current team you have to where they feel like, you're fear of loss by them. Like, of course you need a team, but if I'm begging people to be motivated, I mean, I don't know what's going on with those people. Do I really have the right relationships with them? I need to show them that I'm good, whether they stick around or not, because they got to be doing this for themselves. If they are doing it just for me to get promoted, then they're probably not in the right headspace. So it's okay. Like he said, I just think you got to keep building your depth, keep building your width, keep building more first gens. And like you said, you'll find that captain. Okay. Last couple questions. A lot of good questions today. Do you take individuals' personality type into account when having conversations, or do you treat every conversation the same? As far as someone with tough skin in reference to someone who's a little more sensitive?
So this is particularly how my office does it, run it through council on how your office does it. But when someone gets to leadership, I have them take a personality quiz, because I'm extreme. I like rip off the Band-Aid. Don't sugarcoat me. Give it to me straight. I'll take it on the chin. Someone else doesn't take it that way. So I definitely do. I like Wired That Way. It's a whole different conversation, but Wired That Way is a great book on how to have those conversations of personality. So me personally, I do. And I run that through when I have to have a conversation, briefly looking at their personality. Absolutely. I just try not to make it too systematic. So run it through a filter.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Get to know people's personalities, and you'll get a feel for people the more you talk to them. Are they sensitive? If someone really beats themselves up, then you don't really have to beat them up because they're already hard on themselves. If someone's really oblivious and they're doing stuff and they kind of think they're better than they are and they're screwing up something badly, then you got to let them know. Because if you don't let them know, they're going to just keep thinking that they're doing everything right. And that's the worst thing, is someone's screwing up and they don't even know they're doing it. All right, last question. How would you utilize this system with existing leaders in your team? The ones that you may not have the best relationship with, but you want to change it. How would you apply these skills without coming across aggressive or non-genuine?
Yeah, I think holding standards without relationships creates conflict. So I think you got to build the relationship first. And it's not like, hey, build it so you can hold the standard. I think it's like people, when someone knows you have your best interest at heart, they don't really care how tough the conversation is. The more the relationship is built, the more grace that people give to having this conversation. I know when Richard would have conversations with me, he wouldn't have perfect conversations, but he had built so much of a relationship with me. He had so many one-on-ones, so many dinners, so many hard talks, so many good talks with me, that even when he messed up a conversation and I was feeling some type of way about it, I could run it through a filter and be like, well, this is what he really meant. So I think it's like building a genuine relationship to the point where, hey, people will understand the message. Like, you can't say the wrong thing to the right person.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Danny, I love today's call. I mean, I love all these calls, but the combination of just information you gave, the simplicity, hopefully you guys, everybody on the call took a lot of notes, and the questions, shout out to all the listeners. The questions keep getting better every single week. I love the participation. I think it makes an impact that you guys can ask specific questions. Some of them are very specific, so it's hard for people like Danny, who doesn't know these people, to give you guys correct advice. But hey, sometimes you can give a perspective, and hopefully it helped today. And Danny, you crushed it. Really appreciate you taking the time. Danny, what are you, 22? How old are you?
Yeah, I'm 22.
22 years old, new in the business, but what an incredible career. He's got huge goals, so I know he's not satisfied whatsoever, but we appreciate you taking the time, Danny. Keep crushing it. And you guys got his info. This guy is always on Zooms. He's available. He's down to, do calls, do extra networking. He's a total team player, and that's what makes him successful. So Danny, thank you so much. I appreciate you hopping on the call. Everybody, 2 weeks, Richard Anderson, Talking Opportunity. Doesn't get much better than that. Thanks, everybody.